Elizabeth Noreen clutched the edges of her father's desk, her knuckles turning white as the blood drained from her face. "You did what?" The words came out as barely more than a whisper, but they carried the weight of her shattering world. Wyoming Territory, 1878. The harsh wind howled outside the weathered farmhouse, matching the storm brewing within its walls. Elizabeth's father, Harold Noreen, a man beaten down by drought, debt, and drink, couldn't meet his daughter's eyes as he explained the bargain he'd struck with Thaddeus Ellsworth, the wealthiest rancher in Johnson County. "It's done, Lizzie. I signed the papers this morning." Harold's voice was flat, devoid of the shame that should have accompanied such a declaration. "Ellsworth gets you as his bride, and in return, he's giving me 500 acres of prime grazing land and 50 head of cattle. You sold me." Elizabeth's voice rose, no longer a whisper but a cry of betrayal. At 20 years old, she'd spent her life caring for her father after her mother's death, tending their struggling homestead, sacrificing her own dreams. Now she discovered her value amounted to nothing more than land and livestock. Harold's weathered face hardened. "You'll have a better life with Ellsworth than I could ever give you. You'll want for nothing except the right to choose my own husband," Elizabeth said, tears threatening. "Accept my freedom." "Freedom," Harold spat the word. "What freedom is there in poverty? In watching everything your mother and I built crumble to dust." He stood, swaying slightly from the whiskey he'd consumed. "The wedding is in 2 weeks. Ellsworth is sending a wagon for your things tomorrow." As her father stumbled from the room, Elizabeth sank into his chair, her mind racing. She'd met Thaddeus Ellsworth only twice, a gray-haired man approaching 50 who looked at her with cold, calculating eyes. A man who had buried 2 wives already. A man whose reputation for cruelty to his ranch hands was whispered about throughout the county. Night fell, and with it came a resolve that hardened in Elizabeth's chest. She would not be traded like cattle. But where could she go? What could she do? Her father's debts were real, and the law would side with him and Ellsworth if she simply ran. The answer came with the dawn. She needed to find someone who could outbid Ellsworth. Someone who would help her without demanding her hand in marriage in return. It was a desperate plan, but desperation was all she had. Elizabeth packed a small bag before her father woke. She left a note saying she needed time to accept her fate, knowing it would buy her a few days. Then she saddled her mare and rode toward Buffalo, the nearest town of any size. If she couldn't find help there, she would continue to Casper, or even Cheyenne if necessary. The late August sun beat down mercilessly as Elizabeth rode. Her plain calico dress offered little protection, and her wide-brimmed hat provided the only shade. By midday, both she and her horse were exhausted, but the sight of Buffalo in the distance renewed her determination. The town bustled with activity when she arrived. Cowboys fresh from the trail crowded the saloons, merchants hawked their wares from wooden storefronts, and wagons kicked up dust along the main street. Elizabeth had never visited Buffalo alone, and she felt eyes following her as she dismounted in front of the hotel. "Can I help you, miss?" A stable boy approached, reaching for her horse's reins. "Yes, please." Elizabeth handed him a coin. "Could you water and feed her? I won't be long." The boy nodded, eyeing her curiously. Young women didn't often arrive in town unaccompanied. Elizabeth straightened her dress and walked toward the hotel entrance, her mind still uncertain about her next steps. She needed information who in this town had enough wealth and influence to challenge Thaddeus Ellsworth. Inside the hotel lobby, Elizabeth approached the desk clerk, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose. "Excuse me, sir. I'm new to town and seeking some information about local businesses." The clerk looked up, surprise evident on his face. "What kind of information, miss?" Before Elizabeth could answer, the hotel doors swung open and a man entered, flanked by two others. The reaction was immediate. Conversations hushed, people moved aside, and the clerk's demeanor changed instantly. "Mr. Evans, welcome back to Buffalo," the clerk said, straightening his vest. Elizabeth turned to see a tall man removing his hat, revealing dark hair and sun-bronzed skin. His clothes were of quality but practical, the attire of a working cattleman rather than an idle rich man. What caught her attention most were his eyes, clear blue and alert, taking in the room with a single sweep before landing on her. "Thank you, Jenkins," the man replied, approaching the desk. He nodded politely to Elizabeth before addressing the clerk. "I'll need rooms for myself and my men for 3 nights. "Of course, sir. Your usual suite is available." While the clerk busied himself with the register, the man turned to Elizabeth. "Pardon me, madam. I didn't mean to interrupt your business." "It's no trouble," Elizabeth replied, noting the respectful distance he maintained, unlike many men who would have crowded her space. "I was just asking about local establishments." The man smiled, causing small creases to form at the corners of his eyes. "Then perhaps I can help. Tyler Evans." He offered a small bow but didn't extend his hand, maintaining proper etiquette. "Elizabeth Noreen," she replied, seeing no reason to hide her identity in Buffalo. "Are you visiting family in town, Miss Noreen?" Tyler asked. "No, Elizabeth hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. "I'm here on personal business." Something in her tone must have conveyed her distress, for Tyler's expression shifted subtly. "I see. If there's any way I can be of assistance during your stay, please don't hesitate to ask. I've known Buffalo and its people for many years." Elizabeth was about to decline when she noticed a newspaper on the desk with a headline about a large cattle sale. Beside it was a photograph of Tyler Evans shaking hands with a banker. The caption identified him as T. Evans, owner of Starlight Ranch, following record cattle sale. A cattle rancher with money. Perhaps Providence had just handed her an opportunity. "Actually, Mr. Evans," Elizabeth said, gathering her courage, "I find myself in need of advice from someone knowledgeable about local land holdings and business matters. Would you have time for a brief conversation?" Tyler studied her for a moment before nodding. "I'd be happy to help, Miss Noreen. Perhaps we could speak in the hotel restaurant. It's public enough for propriety but quiet enough for a private conversation." Elizabeth agreed, recognizing both the offer of help and the respect for her reputation. As they walked to the restaurant, she noticed the deference shown to Tyler by everyone they passed. Whoever this man was, he carried influence in Buffalo. The restaurant was nearly empty at this hour between lunch and dinner. Tyler selected a table near the window, in full view of the street, and pulled out a chair for Elizabeth before seating himself across from her. A waitress hurried over. "Mr. Evans, what a pleasure. Can I bring you and the lady some coffee?" "Thank you, Mary. That would be nice," Tyler replied with a warm smile that transformed his serious face. When the coffee arrived, Tyler leaned forward slightly. "Now, Miss Noreen, how can I help you?" Elizabeth took a deep breath. "Mr. Evans, what I'm about to tell you requires discretion. I wouldn't normally share such personal matters with a stranger, but circumstances have forced my hand." "You have my word," Tyler said, his expression solemn. Over the next half hour, Elizabeth explained her situation: her father's failing farm, his desperate deal with Thaddeus Ellsworth, and her determination to prevent the marriage. She omitted certain details, like her escape from home that morning, but conveyed the essential truth. "So you see," she concluded, "I need to find a way to cancel this arrangement legally. If someone could offer my father a better deal, more land or cattle, perhaps he would relent." Tyler had listened without interruption, his face growing increasingly grave. "Miss Noreen, what your father has done is troubling, to say the least. While not illegal in the strictest sense, such arrangements aren't looked upon favorably these days, even in the territory." "But they still happen," Elizabeth said quietly. "They do," Tyler acknowledged. "Particularly when powerful men like Ellsworth are involved." He paused, seeming to consider his words carefully. "I know Ellsworth. We've done business in the past. He's not a man who gives up what he wants easily." "Then you won't help me," Elizabeth said, disappointment crushing her nascent hope. "I didn't say that," Tyler replied quickly. "In fact, I believe I'm in a unique position to help. Ellsworth and I have been competitors for years, and there's little love lost between us. More importantly, what he's doing is wrong." Elizabeth felt a flicker of hope. "What do you propose?" "First, you need a safe place to stay while we resolve this. I own a small house in town that my sister uses when she visits. It's currently vacant, and you'd be welcome to use it. It's respectable and near the church." "That's very kind, but second," Tyler continued, "I need to understand exactly what Ellsworth offered your father. The terms of their agreement will determine our approach." 500 acres of grazing land and 50 head of cattle," Elizabeth repeated. Tyler nodded. "That's substantial, but not beyond my means to match or exceed. However, simply outbidding him might not be enough. Ellsworth is stubborn and proud. He won't want to lose face by having his deal trumped." "What other option is there?" Elizabeth asked. "I need to think on this," Tyler admitted. "And I'll need to consult my lawyer in town. But I give you my word, Miss Noreen, I'll find a solution." Elizabeth studied the man across from her, trying to discern his motivations. "Why would you help me, Mr. Evans? You don't know me." Tyler's expression softened. "My own sister was once pressured into a match she didn't want. I was younger then, unable to help her. She's now trapped in a loveless marriage in Boston." He looked away briefly. "Perhaps helping you is my way of making amends for failing her." The sincerity in his voice convinced Elizabeth. "Thank you, Mr. Evans." "Tyler, please," he said with a small smile. "If we're to be allies in this, we should dispense with some formalities." "Elizabeth, then," she replied, returning his smile. As they finished their coffee, Tyler outlined his plan for the next few days. Elizabeth would stay at his townhouse under the chaperonage of Mrs. Holloway, his housekeeper. Tyler would send a telegram to her father explaining she was safe, but needed time to prepare for her new life, buying them a week at most. Meanwhile, he would investigate the legal options and prepare a counter offer to Ellsworth. By evening, Elizabeth was settled in a comfortable bedroom in a modest but well-appointed house 3 blocks from the hotel. Mrs. Holloway, a kindly widow in her 60s, had welcomed her without prying questions and provided a hot meal that reminded Elizabeth she hadn't eaten all day. As she prepared for bed, Elizabeth found herself reflecting on Tyler Evans. He wasn't what she had expected from a wealthy rancher. There was no arrogance in his manner, no condescension in how he spoke to her or others. His offer of help seemed genuinely motivated by compassion rather than self-interest. Still, she reminded herself to be cautious. In her 20 years, Elizabeth had learned that people's motives were rarely as simple as they appeared. For now, though, Tyler Evans represented her only hope of escaping a future with Thaddeus Ellsworth. She would trust him because she had no other choice. The next morning, Elizabeth woke to the sounds of Mrs. Holloway preparing breakfast. After dressing in one of the few outfits she'd brought, she joined the older woman in the kitchen. "Good morning, dear," Mrs. Holloway said cheerfully. "Mr. Evans sent word that he'll call on you at 10 o'clock. He's been meeting with Mr. Jameson, his lawyer, since dawn." "He's certainly taking my problem seriously," Elizabeth observed, accepting a cup of coffee. "That's his way," Mrs. Holloway replied, setting a plate of eggs and biscuits before Elizabeth. When Mr. Evans commits to something, he sees it through completely. How long have you worked for him? Elizabeth asked, curious about the man who'd become her unexpected champion. Going on 8 years now, Mrs. Holloway said, joining Elizabeth at the table with her own breakfast. Since he first bought Starlight Ranch. I was widowed that same year and Mr. Evans offered me this position. He's been nothing but kind to me. His ranch must be quite successful, Elizabeth prompted. One of the largest in the county now, Mrs. Holloway confirmed proudly. He started with almost nothing, just a small herd and a few good hands. Now he runs over 10,000 head on 30,000 acres. She leaned forward slightly. And he did it honestly, unlike some I could name. Like Thaddeus Ellsworth, Elizabeth ventured. Mrs. Holloway's expression darkened. That man has never made an honest deal in his life. Half the ranchers in this county have suffered from his underhanded tactics. Before Elizabeth could ask more, a knock at the door announced Tyler's arrival. Mrs. Holloway hurried to answer it while Elizabeth quickly checked her appearance in the small mirror hanging in the hallway. Tyler entered, hat in hand, his expression serious but determined. "Good morning, Elizabeth. I hope you slept well." "I did, thank you," she replied. "Mrs. Holloway has been most kind." "Excellent. If you're finished with breakfast, perhaps we could talk in the sitting room. I've made some progress that I'd like to discuss with you." In the sitting room, Tyler declined Mrs. Holloway's offer of coffee, indicating the urgency of their conversation. Once they were seated, Elizabeth on the sofa and Tyler in an armchair opposite, he got straight to the point. "I've sent telegrams to contacts in Johnson County to gather information about your father's arrangement with Ellsworth. What I've learned is concerning. It seems Ellsworth has been plotting this for some time." "What do you mean?" Elizabeth asked. "According to my sources, Ellsworth has been systematically pressuring local merchants to call in your father's debts all at once. He's been purchasing those debts himself, creating a situation where your father would be desperate enough to agree to his terms." Elizabeth felt ill. So this was all orchestrated. My father didn't simply make a bad decision. "He made a bad decision," Tyler clarified, "but Ellsworth made sure he had few alternatives. The land he's offering your father is worth far less than he's led him to believe. It's mostly rocky terrain unsuitable for grazing. And the cattle are likely culls from his herd, not prime stock. So even if I submitted to this marriage, my father wouldn't actually benefit," Elizabeth said bitterly. "Not in the long run, no." Tyler leaned forward, his expression intense. "But we can use this knowledge. My lawyer believes we have grounds to challenge the contract based on misrepresentation. Ellsworth didn't offer fair value for what he's taking." "And what is he taking, according to the law?" Elizabeth asked, dreading the answer. Tyler's jaw tightened. "The contract describes you as a dependent asset of your father's estate, effectively property to be transferred. It's archaic language that wouldn't stand up in a federal court but in territorial courts." He shook his head. "We can't count on the law alone to protect you." "Then what can we do?" Elizabeth felt desperation creeping back. "I'm prepared to offer your father a legitimate deal: better land, healthy cattle, and enough cash to clear his debts completely. No strings attached." Tyler met her gaze steadily. "You would remain entirely free to choose your own path." Elizabeth stared at him, searching for any hint of deception. "That's incredibly generous. Why would you do this?" "Because it's the right thing to do," Tyler said simply. "And because I've wanted to check Ellsworth's power in this region for years. This gives me the perfect opportunity." "He won't give up easily," Elizabeth warned. "No, he won't," Tyler agreed. "Which is why I'm also preparing for a less diplomatic approach if necessary. Meaning what exactly? Let's just say I have friends in the county who owe me favors, including the sheriff and the circuit judge. Tyler's smile was grim. If Ellsworth wants to play by frontier rules rather than legal ones, I'm prepared for that too. Elizabeth should have been comforted by his confidence, but something troubled her. I'm grateful for your help, truly, but I don't want to be the cause of a feud between you and Ellsworth. There's been enough violence in the territory already. I share your concern, Tyler assured her. I'm not looking for a fight, but I need you to understand that Ellsworth is dangerous when crossed. Once we make our move, there's no turning back. I understand, Elizabeth said quietly. When do we start? Today. I've arranged for us to travel to your father's farm tomorrow. My lawyer will accompany us with the new offer, and I'll bring enough men to ensure our safety if Ellsworth is there. Tyler hesitated. Are you comfortable with that plan? Elizabeth nodded, though her stomach knotted at the thought of confronting her father. Yes, the sooner this is resolved, the better. Good. In the meantime, I've taken the liberty of purchasing a few necessities for our journey. Tyler gestured to a package Mrs. Holloway had brought in. Traveling clothes, a proper coat, and boots. Mrs. Holloway helped with the sizing. Elizabeth was touched by his thoughtfulness. Thank you. I left home with very little. It's nothing, Tyler said, standing. I should go now. There are preparations to make before tomorrow. We'll leave at first light. After Tyler departed, Elizabeth spent the day helping Mrs. Holloway with household tasks, grateful for the distraction from her anxieties. The older woman shared stories about Tyler, his kindness to his ranch hands, his generosity to the town during hard times, his unwavering sense of justice. He lost his parents young, Mrs. Holloway explained as they prepared dinner. Raised his sister mostly on his own, working any job he could find. When he finally saved enough to buy his first cattle, everyone said he wouldn't last a year. But he proved them wrong, Elizabeth said, slicing bread. That he did. Through blizzards, drought, and rustlers, he built that ranch into what it is today. Mrs. Holloway set plates on the table. He's a good man, Miss Elizabeth, one of the best I've known. That night, as Elizabeth prepared for bed, she found herself thinking about Tyler Evans not just as her rescuer, but as a man. His clear blue eyes that missed nothing, the quiet confidence in his voice, the respect with which he treated everyone from hotel clerks to his own employees. There was something compelling about him that went beyond gratitude for his help. She pushed these thoughts away, reminding herself that her goal was freedom, not a new attachment. Once this situation was resolved, she would need to determine her own future, not leap from one man's control to another's, no matter how benevolent. Dawn broke clear and cool the next morning. Elizabeth dressed in the practical riding clothes Tyler had provided, a split skirt that allowed for comfortable riding while maintaining modesty, a sturdy blouse, and a warm jacket. The boots fit perfectly, and she wondered how Mrs. Holloway had guessed her size so accurately. Tyler arrived with 3 other men: his lawyer, Mr. Jameson, a distinguished gentleman in his 50s, and 2 ranch hands whose weather-beaten faces suggested years of experience in the saddle. All treated Elizabeth with courteous respect, tipping their hats and addressing her as Miss Noreen. It's about a 6-hour ride to your father's farm, Tyler explained as they mounted their horses. We'll stop midway to rest the animals and have some lunch. Are you comfortable riding that distance? Yes, Elizabeth assured him. I've been riding since childhood. Tyler nodded approvingly. Then let's be on our way. The journey passed more quickly than Elizabeth had anticipated. Tyler rode beside her, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the region's history. His knowledge of the land was impressive, as was his obvious love for it. "My father always said this country gets in your blood," he told her as they paused atop a ridge overlooking a vast valley. I didn't understand what he meant until I struck out on my own. Now I can't imagine being anywhere else. "It is beautiful," Elizabeth agreed, taking in the sweeping vistas. "Though the winters can be brutal." "That they can," Tyler acknowledged with a smile. "But there's something honest about the harshness here. The land doesn't pretend to be gentle or forgiving. It demands respect and hard work, and it rewards those who give both." They continued on, stopping briefly at midday to eat the lunch Mrs. Holloway had packed. As they neared Johnson County, Elizabeth grew quieter, anxiety building as they approached her home. "Are you all right?" Tyler asked softly, noticing her tension. "Just nervous," Elizabeth admitted. "I've never defied my father before." "You're not defying him," Tyler corrected gently. "You're offering him a better alternative, one that honors both your freedom and his needs." Elizabeth appreciated his framing but wasn't convinced her father would see it that way. Harold Noreen was a proud man, even in his decline, and he wouldn't welcome the implication that he'd made a poor bargain. It was late afternoon when they crested the final hill overlooking the Noreen farmstead. Elizabeth's heart sank at the sight. Even from a distance, she could see two unfamiliar horses hitched outside the house. "Ellsworth," she whispered. Tyler followed her gaze and nodded grimly. "It seems he's come to check on his investment. Are you ready for this?" Elizabeth squared her shoulders. "Yes." As they rode into the yard, the front door of the house opened. Harold Noreen emerged, followed by Thaddeus Ellsworth. Both men froze at the sight of the approaching riders. "Elizabeth," her father called, his voice a mixture of relief and anger. "Where have you been? I've been worried sick." Elizabeth dismounted, facing the two men. Harold looked haggard, his clothes more disheveled than usual. Beside him, Ellsworth cut an imposing figure, tall and broad-shouldered despite his years, with iron-gray hair and cold eyes that assessed Elizabeth and her companions with obvious displeasure. "Hello, Father," Elizabeth said steadily. "I needed time to consider my future." She gestured to her companions as they dismounted. "This is Mr. Tyler Evans and his lawyer, Mr. Jameson." "Evans." Ellsworth's voice was a low growl. "What business do you have with my fiancée?" "None, as she's not your fiancée," Tyler replied evenly, stepping forward. "Miss Noreen has asked for my assistance in resolving a matter between you and her father." Harold looked confused. "What's going on, Lizzie? You can't back out now. The papers are signed." "Perhaps we should continue this discussion inside," Mr. Jameson suggested, his refined voice a contrast to the tension vibrating in the air. Harold hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Fine. Come in." The farmhouse kitchen felt crowded with 6 adults. Elizabeth moved to stand near the stove, while her father and Ellsworth took seats at the table. Tyler positioned himself near Elizabeth, a subtle show of support that didn't go unnoticed by Ellsworth, whose eyes narrowed dangerously. "Mr. Noreen," Tyler began, "I understand you've entered into an agreement with Mr. Ellsworth regarding your daughter's future." "That's right," Harold said defensively. "A legal contract. Ellsworth gets a wife, and I get the means to save my farm." "About that," Mr. Jameson interjected smoothly, placing his briefcase on the table. "I've had the opportunity to review the terms of that contract, and I have concerns about its validity." "What concerns?" Ellsworth demanded, his face flushing. "The contract is ironclad." "Not quite," Jameson said, extracting several documents. "You've misrepresented the value of the assets being exchanged. The land you're offering is largely unsuitable for cattle grazing rocky terrain with minimal water access, and the cattle are mostly older animals past their prime breeding years." Harold's face paled. "Is this true, Ellsworth?" Ellsworth waved his hand dismissively. Jameson is Evans's pet lawyer. He'll say whatever Evans tells him to. I have independent assessments, Jameson continued undeterred, from the county surveyor and a livestock appraiser. The true value of what you're offering is less than half what you claimed. Harold turned to Ellsworth, betrayal written across his weathered features. You said that land was prime grazing. It's good enough, Ellsworth snapped. Beggars can't be choosers, Noreen. Additionally, Jameson added, the contract's characterization of Miss Noreen as transferable property is legally questionable at best. Several recent territorial court rulings have invalidated similar arrangements. Elizabeth watched her father as the lawyer spoke, seeing the slow dawning of comprehension. Harold had been desperate and drunk when he made the deal, but he wasn't a fool. What's your interest in this, Evans? Ellsworth demanded, ignoring Jameson. Looking to acquire the Noreen land yourself? No, Tyler replied calmly. I'm here to offer Mr. Noreen a legitimate alternative. He nodded to Jameson, who produced another document. Mr. Noreen, Mr. Evans is prepared to sell you 600 acres of fertile grazing land adjacent to your current property, plus 60 head of prime breeding stock, at a fair market price. Furthermore, he's offering a loan to cover your outstanding debts, repayable over 5 years at minimal interest. Harold stared at the paper Jameson placed before him. Why would you do this? Because it's good business, Tyler said simply. Your land adjoins water rights I've been wanting to secure. This arrangement benefits us both. Elizabeth held her breath as her father studied the offer. She knew Tyler was being deliberately vague about his motivations to protect her reputation. Ellsworth slammed his fist on the table. This is absurd. We have a deal, Noreen. You can't back out now. Actually, he can, Jameson interjected. Given the misrepresentation in your contract, Mr. Noreen has grounds to void the agreement without penalty. You'll regret this, Evans, Ellsworth growled, rising from his chair. Nobody crosses me in this county. Sit down, Ellsworth, Tyler said, his voice quiet but carrying unmistakable authority. We're not finished here. To Elizabeth's surprise, Ellsworth hesitated, then slowly resumed his seat. Something in Tyler's demeanor had given the older man pause. Mr. Noreen, Tyler continued, the choice is yours. Mr. Ellsworth's deal or mine, but I urge you to consider what's truly best for your future and your daughters. Harold looked at Elizabeth, real shame in his eyes for perhaps the first time. Lizzie, I never meant. I thought I was securing your future. I know, Father, Elizabeth said gently, but my future should be mine to determine. Harold nodded slowly, then turned to Ellsworth. I'm sorry, but I'm canceling our arrangement. Your deal isn't what you promised. Ellsworth's face contorted with rage. You'll regret this, Noreen, both of you, he glared at Tyler. And you most of all, Evans, this isn't over. Yes, it is, Tyler replied evenly. Sheriff Benton will be very interested in the fraudulent nature of your contract. As will the land office in Cheyenne, considering your recent applications. Something like fear flickered in Ellsworth's eyes. Without another word, he stormed from the house. Moments later, they heard his horse galloping away. The tension in the room dissipated like morning mist under the sun. Harold slumped in his chair, looking suddenly older and terribly tired. What happens now? He asked. Now, Tyler said, you and Mr. Jameson finalize our agreement. I suggest you read it carefully. It's exactly what I've described, no hidden conditions. While Harold and the lawyer went over the documents, Tyler drew Elizabeth aside. Are you all right? He asked quietly. Yes, Elizabeth replied, the knot of anxiety in her chest finally loosening. Thank you doesn't seem adequate for what you've done. Tyler shook his head. You don't owe me thanks. You stood up for your own freedom. I merely provided the means. Something in his expression made Elizabeth's heart beat faster. There was admiration there, certainly, but also something more, a warmth that had nothing to do with their business arrangement. "Still," she said, "I'm grateful, not just for my sake, but for my father's too." Tyler smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. "Your father will be fine. The land I'm offering truly is good grazing territory, and the cattle are from my best breeding stock. With proper management, his farm can thrive again." "You're a good man, Tyler Evans," Elizabeth said softly. A slight flush colored Tyler's cheeks. "I try to be." He glanced toward the table where Harold was signing the papers. "Once this is complete, my men and I should head back toward Buffalo. We can make it halfway before nightfall and camp." "You're welcome to stay here," Elizabeth offered. "We have room in the barn, and I can prepare dinner." Tyler hesitated, clearly tempted. "That's very kind, but it might be best if we maintain some distance for now. Your reputation has already been compromised enough by this situation." Elizabeth nodded, understanding his concern but feeling a surprising disappointment. "When will I see you again?" The question slipped out before she could consider its implications. Tyler's eyes widened slightly, then softened. "I'll return in a week to check on the cattle delivery," he said. "Perhaps by then the gossip will have died down." Harold approached them, looking more at peace than Elizabeth had seen him in months. "It's done," he said, extending his hand to Tyler. "Thank you, Evans. You've been more than fair." Tyler shook his hand firmly. "Take care of that land, Noreen. It's good country. And take care of your daughter," Tyler added, his voice carrying a subtle warning. "She's worth more than any land or cattle." Harold had the grace to look ashamed. "I know that now." The sun was beginning to set as Tyler and his companions prepared to leave. Elizabeth walked with them to their horses, wanting a few more moments of Tyler's company. "Will you be all right here?" Tyler asked as he tightened his saddle. "Yes," Elizabeth assured him. "My father and I have much to discuss, but I believe he's truly remorseful. This has been a wake-up call for him." Tyler mounted his horse, looking down at her with an expression that made her breath catch. "1 week," he reminded her. "Though if you need anything before then, send word to Buffalo." "I'll come." "I know you will," Elizabeth said, smiling up at him. As she watched Tyler and his men ride away, Elizabeth felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. Not just for her immediate circumstances, but for possibilities she hadn't dared consider before. The week that followed was one of healing for the Noreen household. Harold, sober for the first time in months, worked from dawn to dusk preparing for the cattle delivery. Elizabeth saw glimpses of the father she remembered from childhood: determined, focused, kind. They talked more openly than they had since her mother's death. Harold apologized repeatedly for his terrible decision, and Elizabeth gradually found forgiveness in her heart. They were family, after all, flawed and struggling, but bound by love despite everything. News of Ellsworth's humiliation spread quickly through the county. According to travelers who stopped at the farm, the rancher had retreated to his property and was refusing visitors. Some whispered that the territorial authorities were investigating his land dealings, prompted by information from an anonymous source. Elizabeth strongly suspected the identity of that source, but kept her thoughts to herself. On the morning of Tyler's expected return, Elizabeth found herself taking extra care with her appearance. She wore her best day dress, a blue calico that matched her eyes, and pinned her hair in a style her mother had taught her years ago. Harold noticed her efforts but said nothing, though a knowing smile crossed his face as he left for the fields after breakfast. Tyler arrived shortly before noon, riding alone this time. Elizabeth watched from the porch as he approached, admiring the easy grace with which he sat his horse. He'd become something more than a benefactor in her mind, a man of principle and kindness, whose rare smiles made her heart flutter. "Good day, Elizabeth," Tyler called, dismounting in the yard. "You're looking well." "As are you," she replied, pleased to note that he too seemed to have taken care with his appearance. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, and he wore a clean white shirt under his riding jacket. "How are things with your father?" Tyler asked as he joined her on the porch. "Much improved," Elizabeth said, gesturing for him to take a seat in one of the wooden chairs. "He's been sober since you left, working harder than I've seen in years. The cattle arrive tomorrow." "Yes, my foreman is bringing them personally." Tyler settled into the chair, stretching his long legs. "And I've brought the deed to the land. Once it's filed with the county clerk, it will officially belong to your father." "You've changed our lives," Elizabeth said softly. "I don't know if we can ever repay you." Tyler's expression grew serious. "I didn't do it expecting repayment, Elizabeth." "Then why did you do it?" she asked, finally voicing the question that had occupied her thoughts all week. "The truth this time, not the business explanation you gave my father." Tyler was silent for a moment, looking out across the farmland. "When I first saw you in that hotel lobby in Buffalo," he finally said, "there was something in your eyes, determination mixed with fear. You reminded me of myself years ago, when everyone said I would fail, but I was determined to succeed anyway." He turned to face her. "Then when you told me your story, I was angry not just at Ellsworth or your father, but at a world that still allows women to be treated as property. I wanted to help because it was right, but also—" He hesitated. "Also," Elizabeth prompted softly. "Also because I couldn't bear the thought of you married to a man you didn't love," Tyler admitted, a flush creeping up his neck. "You deserve to choose your own path, your own husband, when the time comes." The implication hung in the air between them. Elizabeth felt her heart racing, hope and caution warring within her. "And if I were to choose," she said carefully, "what qualities should I look for in a husband?" Tyler's eyes met hers, intense and honest. "Integrity, kindness, respect for your independence. Someone who sees you as an equal partner, not a possession." "Someone like you," Elizabeth said, her voice barely above a whisper. The admission changed something between them. Tyler's expression softened, vulnerability replacing his usual confidence. "Elizabeth," he began, "I don't want to presume. You've only just gained your freedom. The last thing I want is to make you feel obligated or rushed." "Is that why you haven't called on me properly?" Elizabeth asked. "Because you thought it would seem like you expected something in return for your help," Tyler nodded, looking almost boyish in his uncertainty. "Exactly. I wanted to give you time, space to decide your own future without feeling pressured." Elizabeth smiled, touched by his consideration. "That's very noble of you, Tyler, but perhaps you should consider that by waiting. You're still making decisions about my future without consulting me." Tyler blinked, then laughed, a warm, genuine sound that transformed his face. "You make an excellent point, Miss Noreen. I stand corrected." "So," Elizabeth said, gathering her courage, "if you were to call on me properly, what would that look like?" Tyler leaned forward, his blue eyes sparkling with newfound hope. "I would ask your father's permission to court you, though with the clear understanding that the final decision is yours alone. I would visit regularly, perhaps take you on proper outings to dinner in Buffalo or a church social." "That sounds lovely," Elizabeth said, her smile widening. "And I would make my intentions clear," Tyler continued, growing more confident. "I admire you greatly, Elizabeth. Your courage, your intelligence, your compassion. I would like the opportunity to know you better and for you to know me, to see if what I already feel might grow into something more." "What do you already feel?" Elizabeth asked softly. Tyler reached across the space between them, his hand stopping just short of touching hers. A connection I've never experienced before. A sense that meeting you wasn't chance, but something more significant. Elizabeth closed the distance, placing her hand in his. The touch was simple but profound, a physical acknowledgement of the bond forming between them. "I feel it too," she admitted. "And I would very much like you to call on me properly, Tyler Evans." His fingers tightened around hers, warm and steady. "Then I shall speak with your father today." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, both aware that something important had just begun. The future stretched before them, unwritten but full of promise. Harold returned from the fields shortly before dinner, greeting Tyler with genuine warmth. The two men disappeared into Harold's study while Elizabeth prepared the evening meal, her hands busy but her mind replaying her conversation with Tyler. When they emerged for dinner, her father's knowing smile told Elizabeth everything she needed to know. Tyler caught her eye across the room and nodded slightly, his expression a mixture of joy and reverence that made her heart swell. The courtship that followed was conducted with proper decorum but genuine passion. Tyler visited the Noreen farm twice weekly, sometimes bringing small gifts, books Elizabeth had mentioned wanting to read, seeds for her garden, once a beautiful shawl from a trader passing through Buffalo. More precious than the gifts were the conversations they shared. Tyler told Elizabeth about his struggles to build his ranch, the years of hardship and doubt before success finally came. She shared her dreams of education, her love of literature, her hope to someday see more of the world beyond Wyoming territory. As autumn painted the landscape in golds and reds, Tyler invited Elizabeth to visit Starlight Ranch, properly chaperoned by Mrs. Holloway. She spent a day touring the impressive operation Tyler had built. The main house was larger than she'd imagined, constructed of sturdy logs but finished inside with unexpected refinements: polished wooden floors, comfortable furniture, bookshelves filled with volumes that made Elizabeth's eyes widen with delight. "My sister sends me books from Boston," Tyler explained as Elizabeth examined his library. "She knows I have limited access to new publications out here." "It's wonderful," Elizabeth said sincerely. "You've built something remarkable here, Tyler." "It's still missing something important," he replied, his voice low enough that Mrs. Holloway, examining a needlework frame across the room, couldn't hear. Elizabeth met his gaze, understanding his meaning. "Perhaps in time," she said softly. By the first snowfall in late November, Elizabeth knew with certainty that what she felt for Tyler was love deep, abiding, and true. He had never pressured her, never rushed her, but his feelings were evident in every look, every careful touch of his hand on hers. On a clear December evening, Tyler arrived at the Noreen farm for dinner, as had become their custom every Saturday. Elizabeth noticed immediately that he seemed nervous, adjusting his collar repeatedly and checking his pocket watch more often than necessary. After dinner, Harold conveniently remembered business in town, despite the late hour and cold weather. Before departing, he squeezed Elizabeth's shoulder affectionately and nodded respectfully to Tyler. Alone in the sitting room, warmed by the crackling fire, Tyler finally revealed the source of his nervousness. From his pocket, he withdrew a small wooden box, intricately carved with a star pattern. "I made this," he said, handing it to Elizabeth. "Woodworking helps me think during the long winter evenings." Elizabeth opened the box carefully. Nestled inside on a bed of velvet was a ring, a simple gold band set with a single perfect diamond that caught the firelight and scattered it in rainbow patterns. "It was my mother's," Tyler explained, his voice husky with emotion. She made me promise to give it only to a woman I loved completely, a woman of strength and character who could stand beside me as an equal. He moved from his chair to kneel before Elizabeth, taking her hands in his. Elizabeth Noreen, these past months have been the happiest of my life. I love you, your courage, your kindness, your independence. I don't want to own you or control you. I want to partner with you to build a life where both of us can thrive. He took a deep breath. Will you marry me? Tears of joy filled Elizabeth's eyes. Yes, she whispered, then more strongly. Yes, Tyler Evans, I will marry you. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Elizabeth marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. What had begun as a desperate escape from one man's control had led to finding true love with another, a man who valued her freedom as much as his own. Tyler rose from his knee to sit beside her on the sofa, drawing her into a gentle embrace. Their first kiss was tender, a promise of the future they would build together. "There's something else," Tyler said as they parted, "something I haven't told you." Momentary worry clouded Elizabeth's happiness. "What is it?" "The land I gave your father, it wasn't just any land." Tyler's eyes held hers steadily. "It was the first parcel I ever purchased, the foundation of my ranch. And the cattle weren't just any cattle, they were descendants of my original herd, the best stock I own." Elizabeth stared at him in shock. "But why would you give that up?" "Because some things are worth more than land or cattle," Tyler said simply. "Your freedom, your happiness, those are priceless to me." Tears spilled down Elizabeth's cheeks as the full magnitude of his sacrifice became clear. "You gave up your beginning for me." Tyler shook his head, gently wiping away her tears. "No, Elizabeth, I gave up my past for our future." Spring arrived early the following year, painting the Wyoming countryside with wildflowers and new growth. On a perfect May morning, Elizabeth stood in the small church in Buffalo, her father beside her, ready to walk her down the aisle to where Tyler waited. The church was filled with well-wishers, Tyler's ranch hands and their families, neighbors from both their properties, friends from town. Even Tyler's sister had made the long journey from Boston, bringing her 2 children to meet their new aunt. As the organ began to play, Elizabeth took her father's arm. Harold, sober and healthy after months of hard work on his rejuvenated farm, looked at his daughter with pride. "I'm so sorry for what I nearly did to you," he whispered, not for the first time. "It's forgiven, Father," Elizabeth assured him. "Look forward, not back." Harold nodded, blinking back tears as he escorted her down the aisle. Tyler's face as he watched her approach was everything Elizabeth had dreamed of: love, admiration, and joy illuminating his features. When Harold placed her hand in Tyler's, the connection between them felt unbreakable, a bond forged through adversity and strengthened by mutual respect. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. They had written their own vows, promises that spoke not of obedience or submission but of partnership and support, of nurturing each other's dreams while building shared ones. "I take you not as my possession but as my partner," Tyler vowed. "I promise to respect your independence even as we grow together, to cherish your strength as well as your softness, to love you for all that you are and all that you will become." Elizabeth's voice was clear and strong as she responded. "I choose you freely, with my whole heart. I promise to stand beside you in all seasons, to share your burdens and your joys, to build with you a home where love and respect flourish." As they sealed their vows with a kiss, applause filled the small church. Elizabeth caught sight of her father, tears streaming unashamedly down his weathered face, and Mrs. Holloway dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. The celebration that followed at Starlight Ranch lasted well into the evening. Tyler had expanded the main house over the winter, adding rooms with an eye toward their shared future. As dusk fell, Lanterns were lit across the property, casting a warm glow over the gathering. "Happy?" Tyler asked, finding a moment alone with his bride as their guests danced in the cleared barn. "More than I ever imagined possible," Elizabeth replied, leaning into his embrace. "A year ago I thought my life was over. Now it feels like it's just beginning." Tyler kissed her forehead tenderly. "This is just the first day of many, my love. We have a lifetime ahead." As they rejoined their guests, Elizabeth reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this moment. Her father's terrible decision, born of desperation and weakness, had led her to a man who valued her freedom above all else, who had given up his most prized possessions to secure it, expecting nothing in return. Tyler had given back land and cattle to win her freedom, but in doing so, he had won her heart as well. And that, Elizabeth knew, was a treasure beyond any price. 5 years later, Elizabeth stood on the porch of their home at Starlight Ranch, watching as Tyler taught their 3-year-old son to ride his first pony. Little James squealed with delight as the gentle animal trotted around the corral, his father's steady hands ensuring his safety. Beside her, cradled in her arms, their 6-month-old daughter Margaret slept peacefully, untroubled by her brother's excited shouts. The early evening sun cast a golden glow over the prosperous ranch, expanded now to include the Noreen property, which Harold had insisted on leaving to them when he passed away 2 winters ago. "Look, Mama, I'm riding," James called, his face alight with pride as Tyler allowed him to hold the reins himself for a moment. "I see you, darling. Well done," Elizabeth called back, her heart full of love for her family. As twilight approached, Tyler lifted James from the pony and set him on his shoulders for the walk back to the house. The boy was still chattering excitedly about his accomplishment, and Tyler listened with all the patience and attention that had first drawn Elizabeth to him years ago. "He's a natural, just like his mother," Tyler said as they entered the house. "Same fearlessness, same determination." Elizabeth smiled, passing baby Margaret to her husband so she could prepare dinner. Tyler cradled his daughter with practiced ease, his large hands supporting her tiny head with infinite gentleness. Later, after the children were asleep, Elizabeth and Tyler sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear Wyoming sky. These quiet moments together had become a cherished ritual, a time to share the day's events and their hopes for the future. "I received a letter today," Elizabeth said, leaning against Tyler's shoulder, "from the Women's College in Denver. They've accepted my article on frontier education for their quarterly journal." Tyler squeezed her hand proudly. "That's wonderful news, your 3rd publication this year." "They've asked me to consider teaching a summer course next year," Elizabeth continued, "just for a month. I told them I needed to discuss it with my husband first." "Of course you should do it," Tyler said without hesitation. "We can manage here. James will be old enough to travel by then, and Margaret too. Perhaps we'll all go to Denver for the month." Elizabeth turned to look at him, still sometimes amazed by his unwavering support of her ambitions. "You wouldn't mind?" Tyler laughed softly. "Elizabeth, I've never wanted to clip your wings. Your mind is one of the things I love most about you. If teaching brings you fulfillment, then it brings our family strength." Elizabeth kissed him, a surge of gratitude and love warming her even in the cool evening air. "How did I get so fortunate to find you?" Tyler's expression grew serious. "I think about that day in Buffalo, often how easily we might have missed each other. If you'd arrived an hour earlier or later at that hotel, if I'd delayed my return from Cheyenne." "But we didn't miss each other," Elizabeth reminded him. "And everything that followed brought us here, to this moment." Tyler nodded, his arm tightening around her shoulders. From the darkest circumstance came the greatest blessing of my life. As they sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars and planning their future, Elizabeth reflected on the journey that had brought them together. A father's desperate bargain, a stranger's compassion, land and cattle traded first for her subjugation and then returned for her freedom. What had begun as the worst moment of her life had led to its greatest joy. With Tyler beside her and their children sleeping peacefully inside, Elizabeth knew that the true wealth of life lay not in possessions, but in love freely given, and received a lesson written across the Wyoming sky in stars as countless as their days together would be.